All right, today we're diving into a really important topic. What actually happens when diabetes isn't well managed over the long haul? We're not just talking about the day-to-day blood sugar numbers, but the quiet, cumulative damage that can happen over years. We're going to break down the long-term complications of diabetes based on the MSD manual, and maybe more importantly, talk about what you can do about it. So let's just start with that big question, right? What really happens when diabetes goes unchecked for years? See, it's way more than just managing your daily glucose levels. It's really about stopping this whole cascade of issues that can build up, often completely silently. And understanding that cascade, well, that's everything. And that leads us right to the heart of the matter. Before we can even begin to talk about specific things, like eyes or kidneys or your heart, we've got to understand the one single root cause that ties all of these complications together. The core issue is actually pretty simple, but its effects are huge. It all comes down to years of high blood sugar, what doctors call hyperglycemia. This leads to widespread damage all over the body, and that damage is mostly vascular, meaning it's a direct assault on your body's plumbing, your blood vessels, from the biggest arteries all the way down to the tiniest little capillaries. Here's a great way to think about it to make it less abstract. Just imagine that over time, sugar is making all the tiny, flexible pipes inside your body become brittle and kind of sticky. That's basically what a process called advanced glycation does. It's this slow, steady process that messes with how your blood vessels work, and it really sets the stage for everything else that's to come. So this damage to your blood vessels, it kind of splits off into two main paths. First, you've got microvascular disease, which affects the tiniest blood vessels. That's what leads to problems with the eyes, kidneys, and nerves. Then you have macrovascular disease, which targets the big arteries and can lead to things like heart attacks and strokes. We're going to start by taking a look at the small vessels first. So let's really zoom in on what happens with these tiny vessels. We're talking about three of the most common and frankly devastating complications that come from this damage. You can think of it as the microvascular trio. First on the list is something called diabetic retinopathy. And yeah, it's pretty much what it sounds like. It's damage to those super delicate blood vessels in your retina. That's the part of your eye that senses light and sends signals to your brain. This is where that vascular damage we were just talking about becomes very, very real. And here's what makes it so critical to get ahead of. It's a leading cause of blindness in adults. But the most dangerous thing about it is that in the early stages, there are no symptoms, none. It can just progress silently for years. How fast it gets worse can vary like crazy from person to person, but the end game can be blurry vision and, yep, even total vision loss. So what's the big takeaway here? You absolutely cannot wait for symptoms to show up. The source material is crystal clear on this. Early detection through regular, proper eye exams is absolutely essential to prevent vision loss. It's all about being proactive against a silent threat. Okay, the second member of our trio is diabetic nephropathy. And you'll see a pattern here. It's the same basic story, just in a different organ. In this case, high blood sugar damages the tiny clusters of blood vessels in your kidneys that are supposed to be filtering waste out of your blood. So put simply, it's kidney disease caused by diabetes. And just how common is this? Well, according to the MSD manual, a staggering 20 to 40% of adults with diabetes will end up developing nephropathy. That's a huge number, and it really shows you just how vulnerable the kidneys are to this whole process. And here we go again with that same silent danger, just like we saw with the eyes. The disease usually has no symptoms at all until it has already progressed to the point of kidney failure. It just hammers home why regular screening, simple urine and kidney function tests, isn't just a nice idea, it's a necessity. All right, the last piece of this microvascular puzzle is diabetic neuropathy, or nerve damage. Now, this one's a little different. It's caused by a sort of 1-2 punch. First, the microvascular damage cuts off the blood supply to the nerves, and at the same time, the high blood sugar itself has a direct toxic effect on the nerve cells. So what does that actually look like? Well, its most common form creates what they call a stocking glove pattern, where it affects the feet and hands with numbness, pain, or sometimes a total loss of feeling. And that loss of sensation is what leads to one of the most serious problems, injuries to the feet that go completely unnoticed. But it doesn't stop there. It can also mess with automatic functions we all take for granted, like digestion or our heart rate. Look, we're not just talking about a little tingling here. This is the kind of thing that makes it so you can't feel a sharp stone in your shoe or a blister that's forming. And that tiny, unfelt injury can turn into an ulcer,
get infected, and ultimately, it can threaten the entire limb. That's the harsh reality of what severe neuropathy can do.
Okay, so we've covered the tiny back roads of the circulatory system. Now let's shift gears and look at the major highways. This is where we get into macrovascular disease. And honestly, the stakes get even higher because we're talking about the heart and the brain. The big villain here is atherosclerosis. You've probably heard of it as hardening of the arteries. Diabetes just puts that process into overdrive. And this leads directly to the major events we all dread. Things like heart attacks, strokes, or mini strokes, and peripheral artery disease, which is basically terrible circulation in your limbs. But wait, it's not just about clogged pipes. Diabetes can also cause a condition called diabetic cardiomyopathy. This is a direct weakening of the heart muscle itself. It hurts the heart's ability to pump blood effectively, and that leads to a much higher risk of heart failure, even if someone hasn't had a classic heart attack. So we've hit the small vessels and we've hit the large vessels. But believe it or not, the impact of long-term high blood sugar doesn't even stop there. Let's take a quick look at the wider systemic effects that go way beyond just the vascular system.
And this is where you really see how it's all connected. That high blood sugar directly weakens immune cells, which makes people much more likely to get bacterial and fungal infections. It's also strongly linked to liver disease. In fact, over half of people with type 2 diabetes show signs of it. And then you get the absolute perfect storm with foot complications. You've got nerve damage so you can't feel, poor circulation so you can't heal, and a weakened immune system so you can't fight infection.
Okay, I know, we've just laid out a lot of pretty serious risks. But, and this is a really big but, the story does not end there. So let's pivot to what is easily the most important part of this whole explainer, the action plan. How do you actually stay ahead of all this? So this is your game plan. This is the recommended screening schedule right from the source, material that turns all this information into action. For your eyes, a dilated eye exam every 1 to 2 years is the key to protecting your vision. For your kidneys, annual urine and kidney function tests are crucial. For nerve damage, a thorough foot exam every single year is what catches problems early. And of course, for your heart, regular lipid profiles and blood pressure checks are non-negotiable. This is the roadmap. This is how you find things early. And this really brings us to the most important message in all of this. Yes, these complications are incredibly serious, but they are not inevitable. The MSD manual is very clear that with proactive monitoring and just diligent management of blood sugar, blood pressure, and cholesterol, all of these outcomes can be dramatically delayed, or in many cases, even prevented entirely. So as we wrap this up, I want to leave you with a question to really think about. Now that you know the risks, now that you understand how this damage happens, what is one single tangible step? Maybe it's scheduling that eye exam you've been putting off, or just recommitting to your management plan. What's one step you can take today for your long-term health?